Hello and welcome to the Breeders' Cup webinar with Dan Illman and Mike Beer, a couple of fantastic DRF handicappers. This is Mike Hogan, the Director of Product Marketing here at the Daily Racing Forum. Welcome, Dan. Welcome, Mike.
Hey, good talking to you, Michael.
Thanks, Mike.
Well, thanks, guys, for joining us. This should be a fun, well, we'll see how long it goes. At least a half hour, maybe 45, and if I can't shut either of you up, it might even go as long as an hour. We'll see. Some of it has to do with whether or not we get questions from our audience. Of course, we're going to go over each of the Breeders' Cup races for Friday and Saturday. And we're going to have a little bit of fun with it, a little back and forth. It's going to be a little loose and light. And if you want, of course, the deep dive into each of those races from Dan and Mike, you can watch the full video breakdowns of each of the races on drf.com, Race of the Day videos. Of course, they do fantastic work with those. But one of the nice things about the webinar is we can keep it a little looser. We can show formulator. We can show certain details. We can show the PPs. And we can take questions from everyone in the audience. So if you're listening and watching and you want to submit some questions, the screen is showing you how to do it. It's this panel on the right side of your webinar screen. Send them along. Hopefully we'll cover a lot of those as we go through just naturally discussing the races. But if there are any particular ones that leap out, I may interrupt the gentleman and ask them directly. So I'm going to switch over now to Google Chrome. And what I'll do first before we dive in is I'll show many of you have seen and hopefully attended some of the webinars we had yesterday. You can go to drf.com/webinars to see the full schedule, and you'll notice that the ones from yesterday now have recaps where you can watch the YouTube replays of them, the ones for today and tomorrow, later today with Byron, and of course tomorrow with Brad Free and Marcus Hirsch. You can click to register to sign up. It's a lot of fun stuff and hopefully some fantastically useful information there. So why don't we bring up Formulator. I'm going to go to formulator.drf.com, and since I'm using a desktop machine, it's going to recognize that and give me the flash version. If you're on a tablet, it would notice that and give you the tablet version of Formulator. But of course, I'm going to start with Friday's card at Keeneland. It's the 30th. We'll dive in. The first of the Breeders' Cup races is race 6. It is the Juvenile Turf 1 mile for 2-year-old colts and geldings. And the first thing you'll notice is it's showing my version of the PPs where I have merged workouts and I have run-up and temporary rail settings, and for dirt races I have the Moss Pace figures. I know you gentlemen may have some slightly different preferences in your formulator, but hopefully we'll just go with that and talk through the races and see if we can come up with some interesting opinions.
No, it's a really interesting race, the Juvenile Turf. You've got a full field, and you've got the two favorites, Mare on the outside. And usually Keeneland runs 12 horse fields going a mile on the turf. They'll try to accommodate 13 and 14 here. I don't want to spend too much time on this race because I know Mike has a very interesting 30-to-1 shot on the morning line, so I'm going to let him talk about it.
Really? That's Mike? That's how you're going to open it? You're just going to let me talk?
Well, and then I'm going to shoot you, and then I'm going to shoot you down while you're wrong. But, that's quite all right. Yeah.
You're setting me up. I get the two Europeans on the outside. I guess I get them being the morning line favorites for the race. They've both done some pretty good things, I guess, although I wasn't necessarily thrilled with the most of the overall performances of Kimrick, the 13, who is the morning line favorite. I guess he looks like he's okay in his defense. The last race he ran probably the best one he's ever run, so I guess that's a good sign for him. I happen to think that the American horses, the horses who we've seen in this country for a couple of starts anyway, are all pretty good, and I think some of them have some real potential. And I thought there were two 30-to-1 shots, as a matter of fact, on the morning line. They were both interesting horses in this race. My top pick was number 9, Sky Marshal, who comes in from Woodbine. This horse raced very greenly first time out, but he broke his maiden against allowance horses in his second start, and he was impressive doing it, and I liked his last race in the Summer Stakes, a race where he did have pace to close into, but I just thought he had a little trouble in that race. at the top of the stretch, and I thought he ran every bit as well as the winner Conquest Daddy-O did in that race. Conquest Daddy-O feels like he's probably going to be one of the horses, maybe taking some play in this race. I don't see why you wouldn't want Sky Marshal over that horse if there's a big discrepancy in price between the two. Maybe there won't be, but I think there might be. And I also thought Barkley Tag's horse, the 5 Highland Sky, is a very interesting horse in this race who ran really well first time out. And he was another horse who had plenty of trouble, I thought, in the Pilgrim Stakes last time.
And I think that Sky Marshal's excellent performance in the summer with trouble, as Mike mentioned, you might want to even upgrade his chances if the course comes up wet, and there's a very good possibility that the course is going to come up wet. I was up at Woodbine for the summer stakes, and that course, while listed as good, was fairly bog-like, and they were going very fast, and Sky Marshal was making his run, turning for home, and he had to be checked while the winner got the jump on him. He kept on very well. I think Sky Marshal is an interesting horse. I'm going to take the opposite tact. I actually think the Europeans are okay, but the post position is no bargain. Hit it a bomb. I've liked his 2 races. He beat 21 horses in his debut, and he came over the top of all of them from the back of the pack. And I guess that's the tactic that the great Ryan Moore has to use from post 14, because he's going to have to figure out a trip. There does appear to be speed. Whenever you have Manhattan Dan in the field, there's going to be speed. I'm assuming that Ryan's going to take Hit It a Bomb back and hope to make one run. Whether he is able to avoid losing too much ground, I'm not sure, and it really all depends on price for him. But horses like Shogun and Birchwood, these are 2 horses that their form doesn't look that great on paper, but I think they're going to get lost somewhat in the shuffle. Be warned that Shogun has worn blinkers in his last 3 races, so it's not going to be blinkers on for him. But I thought he was okay last time out in France. He was down towards the inside, and that was a firm turf course that I don't think he liked. His race in the soft 2-star back, while the beaten favorite wasn't bad. And he's got a little tactical speed and a good inside post. Birchwood's a little greener, and the distance is a bit of a question mark, but his race in the Vincent O'Brien wasn't bad either. So those European horses and Hit It a Bomb and Simric, I think they're pretty good horses. For me, I would be spreading using the Europeans, and Mike and I have a complete 180-degree different take on this race.
So I'm going to ask you both, and this is, of course, the first of the Breeders' Cup races, but and the first of the turf races. As you mentioned, Dan, the weather forecast looks pretty bad right now. It should clear up by Saturday, but there's going to be a lot of water on the turf course, and it will likely be less than firm. In general, how does that change your handicapping, and do you upgrade certain types of horses or downgrade others?
I think you have to look with horses with proven soft turf form. I mean, boy, Mark Cassie's got to be thrilled with a horse like Aeroforce, because when he won the Bourbon, that was a very wet turf course, and it happened at Keeneland. He killed 2 birds with 1 stone that day. He showed 3 birds, if you believe he could handle a yielding turf course in Keeneland. I think the European horses do have an advantage over extremely soft ground, because they usually run and are training over ground various conditions throughout their career. So I would give the European horses a bit of an edge, unless our North American-based horses, have shown that proven form over soft ground. An interesting formulator fact, because I know I'm talking at DRF formulator. If you look at Aidan O'Brien, past 5 years, winner last out, switched to Lasix, 1 for 17, 40-cent ROI, 3 in the money, not so good.
Interesting. Well, Mike, are you thinking the same way as Dan in terms of the softer ground generally favoring the Europeans?
Not necessarily. We'll see what the ground is like for Friday and for Saturday. I know there's a lot of rain going on down there, but they got a pretty good forecast for the next couple of days. I just don't, unless it's glaringly obvious that a horse has already run on a turf course with a lot of give in it and they really liked it. I just don't really see any real way to quantify it and to factor it into your handicapping. Most of these horses haven't run on a course that has a ton of give in it. Some of them have. If you think they've handled it well and you think that upgrades their chances, that's great. I get all that kind of thinking, but I don't see any way to really factor it into your handicap in any meaningful way, unless it's a glaringly obvious situation. For the most part, I don't find that to be the case.
Yeah, and, yesterday in one of our webinars, Randy Moss brought up a really interesting point that I hadn't really considered before, and he said that the conventional wisdom is that softer ground might favor the Europeans because they tend to run on those types of courses more often over in Europe. However, a lot of the time the ones that are handpicked to come to the States to run in North America are the ones that may be more likely to favor a firmer turf course. And so in some ways, they're actually maybe more at a disadvantage in general because they're hoping for firmer ground than what they might see overseas. I don't know if that's true or not. It's just it's something I hadn't really thought about in those terms, and I found it an interesting point.
Well, they also come here for Lasix, a lot of them. I think that's one of the two main reasons the Europeans come, firmer ground and Lasix. We'll see what happens. This is a really fun race because the post positions knock the Europeans all the way to the outside. If you don't like them, now you have even another reason not to like them at shortish prices. It could be an extremely good race to spread to begin your multiple race day, Breeders' Cup Day, and there should be prices.
All right, let's move on to the second race, the second Breeders' Cup race on Friday, and that is the Dirt Mile. There's a very, very legitimate favorite in here in number 3, Liam's Map, even money on the morning line, may even be lower in the actual betting. So I'll ask both of you gentlemen, is Liam's Map a stone single in your multi-race wagers, or is he potentially vulnerable?
I don't see him as potentially vulnerable in this race. I think Dan might have a different opinion than me, so I'm going to sort of let him talk about alternatives to Liam's Map in this race. To me, I mean, I think everybody will look at the race the way that I'm looking at it is that if Liam's Map runs either of his last 2 races, he is going to win this race. Maybe he won't do it. We'll see what happens. I'm taking the position that I just don't want to have very much money in against him at all in this race.
Well, from a buyer speed figure standpoint, he seems like a slam dunk. If he runs 3 out of his last 4 races, he's going to win this race. And the argument also could be made that when the best horse has a pace advantage, that horse is going to win most of the time. That being said, I'm not sure I would completely single him. I wouldn't want to have too much money in against him, but I do respect Red Vine. He does show up every time. I mean, ever since Clement's put him on the dirt, he's come through with good effort after good effort after good effort. It's a bit disappointing that these good efforts in the last 3 haven't resulted in wins. I thought his Kelso was useful, the 1-turn mile race after shipping across the country in the Pacific Classic. And I thought he ran that day. He just caught Beholder the day she freaked. In the Kelso, he didn't break very well, Red Vine. He got pinched back a little bit after stumbling at the start, and he was getting some mud kicked in his face on the rail, and Appealing Tail got away with an easy lead. He ran at the end of that race. He does draw a nice post position for this mile, and you have to come up with ifs if you're going to beat Liam's Map. And I guess the big if is, can any of these other horses, whether it's Braidster or Valid or whomever, or Mr. Z, run with Liam's Map early? It seems a bit doubtful on paper. But stranger things have happened. Obviously, Liam's Map is the horse to beat, but if Red Vine is 6-1 or so, I'd take a small shot against him. I know Mike's never been a Red Vine's biggest fan.
Yeah, I'm not. I do think that the reason that his form has probably seemingly turned around on the main track is because they finally started running him at the right distances. I don't really feel like he's even any better on dirt than he was on turf. I just think they spent an awful lot of time last year running 1.25 miles, 1.25 miles, 1.8 miles, 1 3/8 with him. I think it's too far for this horse. The distance is better for him. I just, I get to looking at him. I think like Dan, I think he ran fine in the Kelso last time. And maybe he was just up against it from a pace standpoint, but he also got a very good trip in there. And I just look at him as, something less than a grade 1 kind of horse. And so I thought that if Liam's Map somehow got beat in this race, that he was going to get beat by a horse like Lee, who has grade 1 credentials on the main track. I think they made the right decision to run him in this race rather than the turf mile. And he's a horse who, in fact, has races that are fast enough to put him in the picture with a horse like Liam's Map. So I thought the right alternative to the big favorite was Lee.
Interesting. So I'm going to ask you guys from a pace standpoint. Dan, you mentioned it a little bit. If there's anybody that can go with Liam's Map early. And you mentioned Mr. Z. It's interesting that he's in this race. A huge long shot. Of course, Dwayne Lucas isn't shy about entering big long shots in the Breeders' Cup. I don't know. I'm kind of with you, Dan. I don't know if he's fast enough to go with Liam's Map early, but isn't that really the only scenario in which he could possibly win the race is on the front end? With Joe Bravo aboard, don't you see, or could you see a scenario where he's just really gunning it out of the gate, trying to get in front of Liam's Map before the turn and trying to take them as far as he can, as fast as he can? Because if he lets Liam's Map go, I don't see a scenario where he ever passes him late.
Oh, I'm sure they're going to try, but if you look at the Moss Pace ratings, Liam's Map's a faster horse than Mr. Z. And it's okay, Mr. Z might be able to try Liam's Map for a half mile, and it could be the same result as when Mr. Z tried American Pharaoh for a half mile in the Preakness, that he kind of just was flicked away like a fly, and it didn't really worry Liam's Map that much. I guess Braidster also drawing inside Liam's Map. His only chance to win, I guess, is to go. Braidster's best races have come when he's on the lead, but I'm not sure he's fast enough to run with Liam's Map. Maybe they can provide enough pressure to soften the horse up just a little bit. He's way the horse to beat. Mike makes a good case with Lee because he does have those back races. I just think he's been very questionably handled after that race at Saratoga, where I was expecting him to run so well, and he just didn't fire. Because, again, if you asked Bill Mott after the Dubai World Cup when he ran such a big race, where is Lee going to be in the middle of September? You'd say, well, he's obviously going to run in the Jockey Club Gold Cup or one of those races. And then after the race at Churchill Downs, where's Lee going to be in September or Breeders' Cup time? He'd be prepping in the handicap races. And after one bad race, they threw him in the Woodbine Mile. And no disrespect to the Woodbine Mile, but it was just kind of an odd spot that he was there. And then after he ran well in that race, but not well enough to win, they were like, well, he's not good enough for the Classic, and he's not good enough for the Mile. We'll run him here.
Yeah, that's actually valid concern with Lee, because his Whitney was a real stinker. Like that, I thought he would run well that day, and he was just awful. I did sort of wonder if Mott was thinking, not dissimilarly to the way I feel about Red Ryan. I think maybe Mott might have been thinking about distance with Lee, that he's not going to go a mile and a quarter in the Gold Cup because he's not going to go a mile and a quarter in the Breeders' Cup Classic. Let's turn him back and try and get a shorter race for him. I think that might work out for them. I also feel like, as far as the pace discussion goes, isn't Valid the one that you worry about? If you think that Liam's Map has taken a lot of early pressure in this race, isn't that pressure coming from Valid, from post 10, gunning it out of there? This horse, I mean, he's clearly fast enough to go with maybe anybody for a quarter of a mile, the first quarter of a mile. Then we'll see, how much of a price he pays for that if they try those tactics. He did give Liam's Map a real hustle at the end of last year at Gulfstream Park. I think we're dealing with a different Liam's Map at this stage of the game. But, boy, Valid, he really took the race to him that day.
Yeah, and you mentioned the post 10 in that short run-up to the first turn at Keeneland is a horse like Valid, who's drawn so far outside, really, really up against it if he is not up near on the lead in that first turn. Is he in danger of getting caught 3, 4, or even 5 wide going into that first turn?
Well, they either have to just come out of there running and go as fast as they can towards the front and try and get up there, or I suppose they could just sort of maybe try and settle off until they get through that first turn and then make a run up into contention up the backstretch. It's not an easy line for his rider to have to walk in this race. I sort of look at it and feel like they're probably going to come out of there running and try and get up, right up, and at least follow Liam's Map towards the front of the race. And then, a horse like Braidster, at least, and I agree with Dan's take, he's probably at his best right up on the pace, but at least he has an inside post. He doesn't have to come out of there running. He could just sort of let Liam's Map clear and then maybe try and sit in behind.
All right, well, interesting. Let's move on to the next race on Friday. That is the Fillies version of the Juvenile Turf. We have another full field. We have another really interesting race. Number 1, Tintype Gal has been scratched, so that allows the also eligible Time in Motion to draw in. Dan, you kind of punted on the first race on the turf for the juveniles. I'm going to put the question to you. What do you think What do you think happens here? Who do you think is the most likely winner? And do you think the favorite and or the Euros are vulnerable?
I always respect the European horses in any race on the Breeders' Cup afternoon. There's no doubt about that. I actually really wanted to like Last Waltz in here, who is a Euro but is now with Chad Brown. I thought she ran some nice bang-up races in Europe, and lo and behold, here she is, and she draws post 14. And unlike Hit It a Bomb, who has shown the ability to sit back and make one run, Last Waltz in her races likes to be forwardly placed. And I'm not sure how this trip is going to work out with Javier Castellano. I was really looking forward to playing Last Waltz. The post position is kind of scaring me, and now I'm kind of just going to relegate her to a, maybe not even a win bet, but I would use her in the multiple race wagers. Mike and I have a vast disagreement on the merits of Alice Springs, the number 3 in here, and I understand what he's saying. When she's been tested against the better horses over there, she's come up wanting, and she seems like a grinding type, but I like this post position for her. I like her tactical speed. I like her professionalism, and I think she's going to work out a good trip, and I'm just not exactly thrilled with our North American-based runners, whether it's Harmonize, whether it's, Gliding By or Sapphire Kitten. I can understand anyone that likes Nemoralia in this race, but again, I'm going to the European runners in here. I think Alice Springs is going to get the additional furlong. She's a daughter of Galileo, and I trust Ryan Moore to work out a trip. But from a gambling standpoint, I'm interested in horses like Last Waltz.
All right, Mike, what's your take?
Yeah, I think that's the whole thing. I think with Alice Springs, I just don't like her from a gambling standpoint because she can't be a good price in this race. And to me, there's just nothing thrilling about her European races. I thought her debut was a fine performance, and obviously she has pedigree, and she's going to get more distance in this race, and that stuff probably going to work out well for her. But they tried her in some of the better races, and I know that getting beat a length and a quarter in a couple of Group 1 races over there looks fine on paper, but just going back and watching those races, to me anyway, she never looked like she was going to win any of those races. And I just don't like the way that she goes, particularly that much. And they dropped her down in class last time to a race she couldn't possibly lose. She won at 2-5. So that's all great. She can't be a good price in this race, and I just don't think that she's that good. I don't think she has that much of an edge. Not only necessarily on some of our horses, but on the other Europeans who came over. I agree wholeheartedly with Dan's take on Last Waltz. I wish she had a better post in this race. But I like everything that she's done over there. Her races are pretty good, and she seems like a horse with a lot of upside to me. She just didn't draw particularly well. I would argue that number 10 Illuminate's 4 races in Europe are way better than the races Alice Springs has run. She's just a horse who has to stretch out from 6 furlongs, and I don't know that the stretch out distance is really going to work for her. They've run her 4 times, all of them at 3/4, and she's got to stretch way out here. That's a tough thing to do, but I think she's a talented horse, and I think that Nemoralia is a really good horse. I like that they came over and tried her at a Grade 1 on the main track because she has a little pedigree, and I think that was a real confident and positive sign for her that they ran her in the Frisette. And I don't think it's a negative that they're running her back on turf. And now her turf form in Europe is very good.
My one issue with Illuminate, and I actually have 2 issues, is the distances. As Mike mentioned, this one's going to have to stretch out past 6 furlongs for the first time. And the Hannons,
turn for the first time.
And make a turn for the first time. But the Hannons, the retired Richard Hannon Sr. and Richard Hannon the younger, who's training this one, they've never had success coming over here to North America. I mean, Richard Hannon Sr. came over here with 17 horses. He went 0 for 17, and many of them were just short-priced runners that disappointed greatly, many of them in Breeders' Cup races. And Richard Hannon the younger has had 2, and I believe he had Toronado come in here, and he kind of bombed in the Breeders' Cup. And I wonder if this barn just doesn't ship their best over here, or at least they don't handle the ship over here. Just something to consider.
Well, and Mike, you mentioned Illuminate handling Alice Springs last out. I wonder if Illuminate takes a lot more money because people see that, Alice Springs is getting Lasix, Illuminate is not. Could that be enough to allow Alice Springs to turn the tables on her? I don't know, but that was sort of part of my thinking, at least in this race, where you're going to get a better price on a horse that didn't finish too far back from Illuminate, who could very well be your favorite in this race.
Maybe. I don't know how. We'll see how they wind up betting the race. It felt to me when I looked at it that Alice Springs was that horse that I thought she was the one who was going to take money in this race with the connections and the better post and the Lasix on. And she comes here off a big win. We'll see what happens. Maybe, but I do share your concerns as far as the distance goes for sure. I don't really care about the Lasix. I feel like if the connections of Illuminate thought she needed it, they'd give it to her. If they don't think she needs it, they won't give it to her. That's fine. I'm not going to worry about that, but the post position could be a problem, and then certainly the distance is something that really worries you about Illuminate. And again, I thought Numeralia was every bit as good as those two horses anyway, and she seems sure to be a price in this race. And again, I don't really feel like the horses. I'm a little disappointed Tin-Type Gal isn't going to run because I thought she had a chance in this race, but I don't think the American-based 2-year-old fillies are in over their heads in this race.
Let's talk a little bit about those North American fillies, not just the American ones. Harmonize as the 7-2 favorite on the morning line, who's done little wrong in her 3 career starts and is only a nose away from being 3 for 3, including that nice run on the Keeneland Turf course, changing her tactics completely and coming from well out of it to win the Jessamine. But also you've got the number 4 horse and Catch a Glimpse, who, at least from a buyer figure standpoint, is the fastest one we've seen this year of the 2-year-old fillies, going wire to wire last out in the Natalma. Dan, I know you're a big advocate of the buyer speed figures. What do you make of her chances in here? And that race came up even faster than the boys ran that day in the summer.
And the race was fast, and it was flattered when the second and third place finishers, 2 decent horses in their own right, came back to win. But again, that was a boggy turf course, and it was one of those slow early, fast late races, and Catch a Glimpse was able to take advantage of that. With Ruby Notion breaking to her outside for Wesley Ward, a stretch-out sprinter, Catch a Glimpse isn't going to get that same kind of trip. Now, maybe she can rate and finish, and it'll be perfectly fine. If she goes anywhere close to her 5-1 morning line, I would stay away. I would need more because I'm not sure how she's going to handle significant pace heat from the 5.
All right, well, let's move on to the next race on the card. It is, at least for Friday, the main event, which is the BC Distaff, a full field of 3-year-old and older fillies and mares. This is a very, very interesting race. Partly because you don't have what looms to be a clear, short-priced favorite, and with the scratch of Untappable in here, I think it just makes it even a wider race from a betting standpoint. Mike, what's your take on the Distaff? Is this a spread race for you, or is there one you particularly like in this race?
Yeah, I won't be spreading too much in this race. I'm a little disappointed that Untappable came out because I just thought they'd probably at least go back to her in some respect in this race, and she'd take some money. And to me, she's just not the same horse that she was last year. But my opinion of this race is this: the older fillies and mares all year long in this country, they just haven't been very good. Untappable dominated these horses last year as 3-year-olds, and she hasn't come back quite as good, and so it's just sort of left the division wide open, and nobody's, in my opinion, has really been able to take control of it. That's probably mostly due to the fact that Wedding Toast couldn't keep in regular racing for Kieran, but I think she's the best one. I wonder what kind of trip she can get in this race. I think there's plenty of speed in here, so I don't expect to see her waltzing on the lead like she was in her last 2 big figure wins. But I don't think she needs to lead to win either, and I think she was always cut out to be this kind of horse, and I think she's the horse to beat in this race. But that being said, I'm happy to try and beat the older fillies and mares with the 3-year-olds in this race. I think the 3-year-olds are okay. I think a couple of them are pretty good, and the one I prefer is the horse that's drawn to the rail on the Chatterbox. I think she might be the best one, and I like all of her recent races. And I like that she has a running style that allows her rider to do whatever he wants to do with her. You can just go back to when she was, prepping for the Kentucky Oaks earlier this year. She won one of the preps wire to wire. She won the second one from last to first, and she won the third one by sitting right up close, tracking the pace, and she was comfortable doing it in any one of those ways. And I like her adaptability to paces, and I love the post that she has, and I like her recent form. I think she's really taken a step forward through the summer and the fall, and I like her chances in this race quite a bit.
I agree with Mike that the 3-year-olds have an edge over the older horses in here, but the one I'm looking to bet is Carolina. She showed in the Acorn, and I know that was only a 1-turn mile, that there's a lot of ability and heart here because she was just smashed at the break. She rushed up to track the pace 5 wide, and she just kept right on going in a race that produced a couple of next out winners. And then in the Coaching Club American Oaks, she tried very hard all the way down to the wire in that 1 1/8 race. She caught a very sharp eye in a chatterbox, and I think she went to the bottom of her reserves, and that resulted perhaps in a regression in the Alabama, going 1 1/4 miles, a distance that's just a little bit too far for her. I actually thought her Beldame, while it just looks like a one-paced running line, I thought it was okay. I thought Speed did very well at Belmont on the 26th of September. Wedding Toast was able to control a very easy lead. Carolina was able to ease out, run second. It was a perfectly legitimate prep race for her. She draws outside Wedding Toast and a couple of the other speeds, and I think Rosario's going to have her in the clear. According to the workouts, she's been working with Race Day and company and holding her own against that older male who's a good horse on his day. I just think Todd has Carolina coming up to this race the right way. She has ability. The 2 turns isn't an issue. I just think she's an honest horse. Maybe 1 1/8 is pushing it, but she's 12-1 on the line, and I don't see why I won't get every bit of that. I'm looking to take a shot with her.
Very good, very good. Well, we have a question from one of the attendees. Zahir Daya asks about Wedding Toast in particular, and assuming she is the favorite, do you see her vulnerable outside of New York? It seems that her best races have come in New York, and particularly at Belmont, and the one effort at Keeneland, albeit at 7 furlongs, was her weakest effort, certainly of the year. Do you see that as a concern, or do you see that as more of an anomaly, and she's still, at least from a figure standpoint, the fastest in the race, and if she gets her trip, she'll still run okay?
I guess I get those concerns. I'm not going to worry about them shipping her. The Madison, that Keeneland race, I think, well, it wasn't a terrific performance. I don't think it's as bad a performance as it looks like it was. That was a wicked pace going on in there. She chased it wide every step of the way. I would argue that she ran one of the better performances in that race in particular, because she just took all the worst of it as far as trips go. She's won at Gulfstream Park. I think I'm not going to worry about her shipping out of New York and being able to bring her race with her. I think it's just more a question with her of, what kind of trip can she get? Because there is a lot of pace in this race, and I feel like she wants to be close. She doesn't need the lead, but I think she wants to be close.
Yeah, and I would even, my concern for her is more the distance. I'm not sure she's best at 2 turns and going 1 1/8, and at a short price, even though she's the only one in the field to post a triple-digit buyer speed figure, and she's done it 3 times. I just think she might be better in those elongated sprints that Belmont Park allows, and not, or at Gulfstream Park for that matter. It's not necessarily so much that surface or that course, but more the layout of the course.
Oh, I think that I kind of agree with Mike concerning Wedding Toast in here, though. I think her overall body of work supersedes whether she can ship or whether she can handle the 2 turns. The trip concerns me somewhat, although she's very versatile. Mike, as you and I were talking about yesterday, she's the fastest mare in the race by a long way, and has to be included in any sort of multiple race bets, but she's going to be the favorite, and she's not going to get the pace scenario she got last time out in the Beldame. Another horse I want to mention is Stellar Wind, who's another one of those 3-year-old fillies that I hope has a little bit of upside. And if you just look up and down on her form, she's done absolutely nothing wrong. And I've always been Stellar Wind's biggest fan, and she's going to get pace in this race, and she's going to be running at the end. And you might say, well, she only won the Summertime Oaks by a nose, but she had about 6 lengths worth of trouble in that race, and should have won like a 2 to 5 shot would. And then the Torrey Pines, she had to be close to the pace, and she won. My only concern is that John Sadler really hasn't treated Stellar Wind like a good horse. Ever since the Kentucky Oaks, where she ran fourth, it was, well, we're thinking of running her on the turf. And you're like, what? Why would you run her on the turf? You want to obviously prepare her for the big races at Saratoga, the championship-making races. And then they run her in the Summertime Oaks, where she's 2 to 5. And then they run in the Torrey Pines, where she's 1 to 2. And they decide, well, we're not going to run in the Spinster. We're just going to take our time and run here. And you wonder if she has enough preparation. I think from a talent standpoint and a race shape standpoint, she does have a chance, though, at a price to at least get a piece of this.
Yeah, and you also mentioned John Stadler. One of my concerns for her would be he doesn't really do well when he ships them outside of California. I think he's on a pretty long losing streak of any horses that have raced outside of the state. And as she showed in the Kentucky Oaks, although she ran a good race rallying late, she still didn't hit the board as your 3-to-1 favorite. But you're going to get a square price on her, and she's one, I think, with upside that I find a little interesting as well.
I think he's 2 for 37 or something over the past 5 years outside of Southern California with something like a 27-cent ROI. Maybe that's why they kept her out of Saratoga. I don't know. You'd think if you had a legitimate Grade 1 horse, you'd run against the big Grade 1 races and the good horses.
I think you're right, and I think those 2 wins both came in Arizona and in listed stakes, and so in the big races, it's
outside of the Rockies, not so good, Michael.
Exactly. All right, well, let's jump to the Saturday card. We've got is it 9 full Breeders' Cup races, starting with the 3rd? Is that right?
That's
correct.
Have
my numbers right? All right. Well, race 3 is the Juvenile Fillies. Here we have the first of a few short-priced favorites likely to meet the starter. And drawn to the very far on the outside, it's number 10 Songbird, 7 to 5 on the morning line. I'll ask you, Dan, is she a single or is she vulnerable in this spot?
I wouldn't say she's either. I would say you obviously have to use Songbird. I wouldn't say she's a single. Because if you look at her races, she's been able to control paces over speed-favoring tracks. It's quite possible she will control the pace one more time. I think Nickname and Javier Castellano is going to at least try to push her, and I wouldn't be surprised if Rachel's Valentina and John Velasquez, there's a little bit of race riding going into the first turn. Let's force Songbird to cover some ground before we tuck in the stalking position. Songbird is way the horse to beat. For me, this is a stab race. I like Landover C a little bit, and I know Landover C couldn't get within hailing distance of Songbird in her 2 races. But again, both of those races were contested over speed favoring tracks, and I really like the way she kept on with it. In her most recent start, she was never going to get to Songbird after that one cleared over that track, but she kept on to her business. She was second, and again, the same thing with Carolina. It was one of those races where I thought it was a good, solid prep. She got a nice race into her. She draws an inside post. She's going to be sitting behind Songbird again. Maybe she'll never beat that horse, but I'm expecting a good effort at a good price.
And it's worth noting her older half-brother, War Story, is running a little earlier in the day in Dirt Mile, albeit as a long shot.
I'm not sure if that's an indictment or a...
Well, we're keeping it in the family or that was the day before, rather, in the Dirt Mile. Mike, what's your take on the Juvenile Fillies in general, and in Songbird as a likely short price favorite in particular, drawing the worst of it in the 10 post?
Yeah, I guess the post isn't great for her. I do suppose that it'll come running out of there and try and make the front. I don't know. I spent probably way too much time looking at this race because I really did want to find an alternative to her and just maybe take a shot against her. I've been very impressed with her races. It's not any kind of real knock on her. Obviously, she's been much the best 3 times in a row. I just, I got looking around, and at the end of the day, after going through it, 3 or 4 times, I just couldn't talk myself into anybody else, and I left her on top. And I think she's just supposed to be very hard to beat in this race. I will say that, the 2 biggest hopes, I guess, from New York, who would be obviously Rachel's Valentina and Tap To It. They were kind of a couple of horses who I didn't really have a great feel for, and felt like I would just try and maybe beat those two horses who have to take some money, and maybe try and get those two horses out of the number anyway. No knocks on Rachel Valentina, obviously, but she'll just take too much money just based on things that don't appear in her running lines and in her past performances. And as far as what she's done on the track, she's going to take money because of who she is and more specifically who her mother is. And that's all well and good, but her races aren't that flashy. There's nothing that particularly inspiring about them. She won both of them. I thought that she looked good doing it. She's very professional, obviously, but they're just not fast. And we'll see. Maybe she catches the right setup. Maybe she'll really appreciate stretching out, and she'll take a big step forward here. But I feel like she has to, and I don't really want a short price on her. I was interested in Dan's horse. I thought Landover Sea was really interesting, and I do like that she got a better post than Songbird did. But it's twice now that she's tried that horse, and it really hasn't been that close. And I just couldn't convince myself that anything was necessarily going to be different on Saturday. I will say that one horse I'm going to throw in somewhere, at least underneath at a price, is the 6 Bold Quality for Kelly Breen. And I thought this horse's debut was a really, really good performance. And I thought she ran well in the Pocahontas. They stretched her right out, a 3-furlong stretch out. And I thought she ran well in that race. She did, get disqualified from second, which I thought that they probably went a little too hard on her. She did come out and bump a horse at the top of the stretch, but I thought she was clearly second best. And she was clearly second best to a horse with Rocky Queen, who she'll run against again today, who just got a perfect trip in there right up the inside. I thought Bold Quality has run well in both of her starts, and I wonder if she can take a little step forward here and get a piece of this thing.
All right. Yeah, some interesting thoughts on the race. I'm kind of with you guys in that Songbird is the most likely winner, but I do like Landover Sea to run a big race. Whether or not she's actually going to be good enough to turn the tables, not sure. But I also like the idea of playing out some of the shorter priced horses with question marks in here, and maybe try and take down the Try or the Super.
Sounds good to me. You're going to get paid if you take a Songbird and knock her out. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about knocking Songbird out, but
if you're not tapped to it out, maybe, and if you could somehow get Rachel's Valentina out, you're getting giant prices. This is the Breeders' Cup. You're going to get big prices no matter what.
Right. What did you think of Rachel's Valentina, Dan? I had a tough time, convincing myself that I wanted to use her at all in this race. Although I'm not going to be surprised if she runs well. Do you have her in there? Are you using her?
I think I picked her third in the race, and I think if her name wasn't Rachel's Valentina, she would be a very interesting 5 or 6 to 1 shot in here. She's going to be a short price. She doesn't have the brilliance that Songbird possesses. I think the best qualities you have for Rachel's Valentina, take out the pedigree, is she's an extremely professional horse. She runs like a seasoned, older performer. I'm not concerned about the distance, and she has Pletcher in her corner. But from her 2 races, other than that professionalism, it's not like she's been brilliantly fast. Songbird's 3 races have been faster than Rachel's Valentina. I think she's okay. I think she's going to need to be better than okay to win on Saturday.
All right, well, let's move on to the 4th on Saturday. It's the Turf Sprint, another full field. Your favorite is 5-2 Lady Shipman, a 3-year-old filly facing both boys and older. What's your take on her as a favorite, and what's your take on the race in general? Dan, we'll start with you.
Well, it's the quintessential spread race like it is every year because this is just chaos. These horses are extremely evenly matched. It's going to come down to break and trip. As for Lady Shipman being the favorite, you can have her as the favorite in here. She's fast. She's going to deal with some other speed. You mentioned she's taking on older, battle-tested males for the first time, and I'm wondering if she is coming to the end of a very tough campaign, and she's starting to feel the effects of fast race after fast race after fast race. And she ran okay last time out. I didn't like the fact it took her till mid-stretch to make her final lead change and that she was drifting out, and it took a horse with 3 legs that ran her down. I mean, Ageless is as game as they come, but Ageless was compromised, you would think, in the middle of that race when she clipped heels and opened up this giant gash, and she still ran Lady Shipman down in the stretch. She's had a wonderful year. If she's the favorite, I think you're supposed to try to bet against her. But this is the kind of race where you use 5 to 7 horses, right, Mike?
I definitely look at it that way. I agree with your take on Lady Shipman 100%. I like her as a horse a lot, and I think she's good. but I don't need her in this race. Getting away from that opinion, though, I don't really have a strong one as far as, a straight-up win candidate goes. I think there are a lot of horses who can win. I agree with Dan. It's going to come down to trip, and whoever gets the best one. I wound up, putting Undrafted on top, and he's a horse. If anybody's going to need a trip, he's going to need a trip because he's going to be making one run from the back of the pack, and hopefully he'll be able to work something out where he can get a clean one and maybe not, get spun into the parking lot out of the turn. But I like him as a turf sprinter, and I'm not so convinced. Dan and I have talked about this a lot over the last couple of weeks. I'm not so convinced that 5.5 is too short for him, although maybe it is. I get those concerns with him. I think it's okay for him.
I think he's going to get pace. Again, the question is whether he's going to be able to get through at a key point in the race. I think you have to use Undrafted. I think that was a very crafty spot that Wesley Ward put him in last time, a mile race against Tourist. He played Tourist's game. He had to be a little bit closer. He wasn't going to beat that horse at a mile, and we'll see Tourist a little bit later on in the card. Yeah, I agree. I picked Undrafted on top, but I want to caution everyone. Again, this is a race where I would use 5 horses. I think Pure Sensation is a little bit interesting. Mike and I were trying to make a case for Mongolian Saturday, who was nosed out by Pure Sensation and that Turf Monster at Parks. Stacked Deck is a crazy 30-to-1 shot that maybe I would throw in, and perhaps he's just a better horse on synthetic, but he has run good turf races, and he was, like many of these horses, were forced to run on the dirt last time out at Keeneland because it was washed off the turf. You got to run or you don't get a prep for the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint. He wasn't embarrassed in that race. I don't see so much separating these horses that you're supposed to take a shot with bigger priced horses in this race. Again, this is a spread race for me. I would probably go 5 deep or so, but I think Undraft probably will give his usual rock-solid performance.
All right, well, let's move on to the 5th race. We're running a little short on time because we've talked so much about the earlier races, and I want to make sure we leave time for the Classic. We've got the 5th is the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Sprint, another large field, 7 furlongs. Is a bit of a concern for a number of these logical contenders, and your defending champion or your defending winner in Judy the Beauty is here again, and not your favorite. What's your take on this one, Mike? We'll start with you.
I wish I had something more interesting to say about this race. I found it super tough. I will say this: I felt that there was a lot of speed in this race, and I don't see how there's not a ton of hitting going on early in this race between Terrace and La Verdad and Super Majesty, Stonetastic. I can't imagine that they're not going to be really going in this race early. And so I wanted closers. My problem was I just couldn't find any who were super interesting. I felt like coming in I would be way against cavorting as the favorite. Just because I felt like she'd be, taking on a tougher challenge she's ever taken on before, but she just seems super logical. She fits the race very well from a pace standpoint, and I had a tough time getting away from her. But I gave Artemis Agriterra a long look at this race, and that's probably the horse I'll go to. I obviously hate that it's a year-long layoff. She hasn't run since this race last year, where, by the way, she didn't run that poorly. The running line doesn't look that great, but she was okay in there. And it just seems like an atypical move for Mike Hushen. He doesn't do this. He doesn't run his horses at races like this. He's a very conservative guy. He knows what he's doing. He's one of the best trainers in the world. And he's bringing her in this race. He seems pretty confident that she's going to run. And I felt like she'd be closing ground late in this race, so I took her on top of the price.
She's just not my cup of tea, but I could certainly understand if she wins because she's going to get the race shape. On her day, she's just as good as the rest of these fillies, and Mike Hushen, as Mike Beer mentioned, is certainly one of the best. As for Judy the Beauty, she could easily win this race. She's going to get the right race shape. She draws outside, which I don't think is a hindrance. She's going to get the pace to attack. But at the end of the day, and it's not just from a buyer speed figure, decline. I think her form is in decline. I thought her honorable miss was fairly awful against La Verdad. I thought on the Jimena Destaff she had every chance to beat Dame Dorothy, and she couldn't do it, and lay off or not, she's supposed to win that race. And last time out, she was down inside, and she had a little bit of trouble over a wet track, but I expected a little bit more pop. I think from name recognition, she's going to get bet. I would much rather have Wayville Avenue for Chad and Joel Rosario, and she only has one race on her card that's capable of winning this, but it was was her last race, the Gallant Bloom, a race in which she chased La Verdad over that speed-favoring track on September 26th. And if you give a fast horse like La Verdad a first quarter in 22-3, you're not catching her at 6.5 furlongs. I like the way Wayville Avenue finished that race. I like the way she galloped out, and supposedly she has been working very, very well for this. I think there's going to be pace, and I think this one's going to be running late. I hope I get close to the 12-1.
All right, so let's move on to the 6th race on Saturday. It is the Filly and Mare Turf, another interesting race and potentially one that could be dominated by the Europeans. Is that what you're thinking in this one, Dan?
Well, Legatissimo, I think, is the way the horse to beat because she seems to show up any time, no matter distance or surface, whether it's soft or firm or a mile and a quarter, and she draws a solid post and gets Lasix. Her best races are better than the other horses in here. Do I think she's a slam dunk? Not necessarily, but she's certainly an A in any sort of multiple race wagers. I'm a bit interested in two of the other longer-priced European horses, Miss France and Bowina will be the bigger price of the two, so I picked her on top in the paper. She was able to beat Esoterique over soft going 5 starts back at a mile, and Esoterique is going to be very, very salty a little bit later on in the Breeders' Cup Mile. She had a lot of trouble, did Bowina, in her subsequent race, the Falmouth Stakes, where she was down towards the inside, had nowhere to go, had to ease to the middle of the track with a furlong remaining, and that trip just didn't work out. If you look at her form, and maybe it's fair to say she usually finds 1 or 2 better, true. But I think at this elongated distance, you look at her race 2 starts back at a mile and a quarter, it was very good and it was over soft ground. The distance helps her, I think the Lasix helps her, and I think the soft ground helps her. I'd use her at 15-1, and I'd also use Miss France, although she's starting to have this worrying seconditis streak going for her, and the distance for her is a bit of a question, and the surface condition is a bit of a question. She might want firm and she might want a mile, but I think I would use those 3 Europeans. I mean, Legatissimo, way the horse to beat, but I would use Bowina and Miss France and maybe put a few bucks on Bowina.
All right, Mike, what's your take?
Yeah, I think Legatissimo's the right, horse to beat in this race. She's done absolutely nothing wrong. Her races are all good, and she just seems like the best of the Europeans to me. I was interested in Miss France. Like Dan, I don't care for her settling for second best 4 times in a row, and I don't really know that the extra distance works for her, but she's an interesting horse. She has some ability. I like those two. The horse that I am most interested in trying to beat them with is the 3-year-old, as a matter of fact, the number 2, Santiago Italia. I happen to think this horse is really talented. I think the shorter distance of this race this year, shorter than it usually is, really works for her. And I love that she has an inside post this time after not only getting hung out from post 9 last time, just a couple of weeks ago here in a Grade 1 race, but I think getting towards the inside where she was very overconfidently ridden, I think, last time, and it might have blown up in their face a little bit. She has a lot more speed than that, and I wonder with an inside post going a little longer in a race that doesn't have that much pace, if they aren't going to be a little more aggressive with her in here. I think she's a talented filly with even more upside and forward to go. Legatissimo, the horse to beat. I'm going to try and beat her with this horse, though, because I think Santiago Italia is really talented, and I think she's going to get overlooked in this race now because she barely bombed last time.
Well, I don't know if she bombed. I think she was really poorly. Yes, I mean, if you watch that race, and again, Joel Rosario is a brilliant rider, but sometimes he does things that makes you want to scratch your head. And he rode Santiago Italia like, I don't know, she was all along last time out and must have taken her to the 6th path on the backstretch, and you just can't win losing that much ground at Keeneland. There is no pace in this race, and I think Mike might be onto something. Perhaps Santiago Italia just guns out of there, makes the front, and just takes this and turns this into a crawl. She is a very good filly, going to have to wheel back on short notice. Do you think, Mike, this was the original plan? If she won the QE2, would she be here?
I have no idea. I don't know. I do know that taking horses and saying, oh well, they just ran 3 weeks ago, you can't run them back now is pure folly. She can run back in 3 weeks. Everything's going to be fine. Maybe they wouldn't have run here if she'd won the QE2, but the fact is she didn't win the QE2. She's not going to be 3-5 this time. She's going to be significantly better priced this time, and she has ability. She's a good horse.
All right, let's go to the next race on the card. It's the 7th. It's the It's the BC Sprint, one of the most interesting races on the card from my standpoint, because you've got two horses that I think are extremely fast in Run Happy and in Private Zone. Do you favor either one of those, Dan, or do you see the winner coming from somewhere else and maybe at a bit more of a price?
Those two have the best resumes, but I think the Breeders' Cup Sprint, like the Turf Sprint, I would not be surprised at all if there's some sort of ridiculous, chaotic result. I mean, Run Happy and Private Zone are both very good, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for them. But I think you can make the argument that in their most recent races, they kind of got away with easy pace situations. I was watching the King's Bishop again, and I was fairly stunned that Limousine Liberal, who was battling with Run Happy going into the turn, decided, well, I'm going to take back and get to the outside, and Run Happy was able to just relax the middle portion of that race and kick on home, and Limousine Liberal completed the two-speed number. And last time out in the Phoenix, again, right to the front and got away with a breather. In Private Zone in several of his races this year, right to the front and got a breather. There are no breathers in this race. You've got fast horses all around, whether it's Masochistic, whether it's Favorite Tale, who's wickedly fast on the outside. I just don't see how Run Happy and Private Zone can replicate those easy trips. And maybe they're just simply too good, but this is the kind of race where I'm just going to look for a nutty horse, and Barbados is my nutty horse going out for Michael Tomlinson. He ran second to Run Happy last time out. This is a horse that's always run well at Keeneland. I liked what he did. He was making a mid-move down towards the inside from the back of the pack, took a lot of mud in his face, eased out, and he kept on well to win the photo from work all week. Early in the year, he was on his way to being one of the better three-year-old sprinters in the country, and unfortunately he got hurt after the Hutchison. It's been a long road back, and I wonder if he's just getting back to form right now. But this to me is a spread race. I could use several horses. I think the favorites are good. I'm not sure they have such an edge over this field that they should be getting all of the attention.
Yeah, I think Dan I agree with everything he said about the race. I think Private Zone's a really good horse. In particular, I don't know that 6 furlongs is his best distance. Obviously, he can handle it. He's won 2 Grade 1s at 6 furlongs. But he also is a horse who likes to control the action up front. Maybe he won't get to do it this time. I think he's the horse to beat, though. As far as Run Happy goes, I like him, and I think he's a nice horse, and he has a little bit of that running fool to him. Like, there's just no telling how good he might ultimately turn out to be. I'm way against him in this race, and if he's 3-1, I'll be knocked out of every multi-race wager that I play because I won't be using him. And I just feel like it's an interesting race outside of those horses anyway. I wish I had a stronger opinion, a horse I could really feel like I could, dig into and get down on, but I don't really have that. I do think the 3-year-olds are pretty good, though. Dan's horse, Barbados, is an interesting horse to me, as is a horse who finished, just behind those horses last time in the Phoenix. That's Holy Boss for Steve Asmussen, who I love the job Asmussen's done with him, sort of bringing him along and improving him all year. He had the worst of it. I don't think he cared for the sloppy track last time in that Phoenix. I don't know how he was last early, but he was, and I thought he made a sort of a deceptively good run at the end of that race. I think this horse is pretty good, and I'm going to give him a chance to rebound in this race.
All right. Sounds good. Let's move on to the next race on the card. It's the 8th race. It's the BC Mile. It's the start of the Pick 4 ending in the Classic. Again, you've got some Europeans facing some horses that have been running in North America. Mike, where did you go in the mile?
I go to either Make Believe. I think Andre Fabre has a stranglehold on this race. Either Make Believe or Esoterique. I think they're the 2 best horses. And I just felt like I thought they had a real chance to actually run 1-2 in this race. I don't like the American horses at all. I think they're just way up against horses of that quality. I loved Make Believe's last race. He might be a horse who's a little hard to ride, so they may need to get him covered up early in the going here, but I think if they can do it, he's a horse who could easily win this race. I like him a lot.
You have to respect the Europeans in this race, whether it's Make Believe or whether it's Impassable, who ran right over the top of Miss France, who we talked about in the Filly and Mare Turf preview in her last race, that Group 2. Even Time Test, although he's stuck with a tough outside post position. And, of course, Caracanti, who won this race last year. The issue with Caracanti is he's had some physical issues this year with quarter cracks. His 2 races have not been very good. Hey, maybe LASIK's back on and getting back to a North American style of racing will work for him. him. I wonder if soft ground at this point in his career is what he wants. I know it's what Tepin wants. I'm just not sure Tepin's good enough to beat, legitimate European horses. But boy, if she runs that race she did last time out at a mile over a boggy turf course, she's going to be very salty in here. I mean, that was a gigantic race, and even if you take that race out, she's been one of the more consistent filly milers all year long. She's going to be sitting behind, obviously, and maybe Tourist. I'm expecting a good effort from her. I'm not sure if she's good enough to win, but at 12-1, I think there are worse 12-1 shots, considering she handles the surface. And if it is a very soft turf course, she's going to love it. She's going to love it. Mike's looking at me with just this dubious look on his face, like, how could you like Tepin?
She's hopeless in this race. She's absolutely hopeless in this race.
All right, I love some disagreement here. Well, that's great. So it sounds like if Tepin wins, one of you will be moving on with your pick 4, and one of you will be out.
I think I've just cemented the run happy Tepin double, obviously. But I don't like either one of them.
All right, let's go to the 9th race. It's the Juvenile. You've got some interesting runners here, and one of your favorites, Nyquist, I think was really compromised when he drew post 13. Dan, we'll start with you. Where did you go in the Juvenile?
I'm leaning towards 2 horses in here. I thought Greenpoint Crusaders Champagne was a very professional, solid effort where he was pinched back in the start of that race, took a lot of mud in his face down the backstretch, came out very wide turning for home, and just ran by those horses. It wasn't the strongest Champagne field in the world, and he has a wet track pedigree. But I think he runs anything close to that 94 Beyer speed figure here over a wet track. Boy, he's going to be tough. The horse I did pick, though, I'm going to go with Exaggerator one more time, and this is just a very professional 2-year-old where it doesn't matter if there's any kind of traffic, he will run in it. It doesn't matter if he's in behind horses, he will run in it. He ran okay in the Breeders' Futurity last time out. I wonder if Keith DeZormo was using that as a true prep for the Breeders' Cup. While beaten by Brody's Cause in that race, I thought he had like a sneaky trip where he was down inside and Rated R Superstar looked like he was backing upright in his face on the turn. I think Kent DeZormo figured, well, Rated R Superstar's done. I got to go after this loose leader. He might have moved too soon, and then all of a sudden Rated R Superstar was back in the race. Exaggerator made the front. I would have liked to have seen him finish off Brody's Cause, but he's just a horse that fires every time. He's going to give a good account of himself, win or lose, but I'm leaning towards the 3 and the 9, and Exaggerator will be a better price, so I'll bet him to win.
All right, Mike.
Yeah, I get that. I like the 2. I think Dale Romans actually has a pretty strong hand in this race. I like Brody's Causes. I like both of his races. I guess the issue with him is that he's more of a closing type. You've gotten him at big prices in his 2 wins, and now you have to take him, perhaps as the favorite in this race. That doesn't thrill me. But I think he's a good horse, and I'd be using him. I thought Dale's other horse, Unbridled Outlaw, is a real interesting horse in here. He had real trouble in the Iroquois last time. Otherwise, and I'm not going to sit here and suggest he would have won, but he certainly would have been a lot closer. I thought he ran really well, and I liked his 2 starts prior to that. I think he's more of my idea of a good price horse in this race. I'm not against Greenpoint Crusader. I think he's a good horse. Obviously, I guess you worry a little bit that it was a sloppy track last time, because he is really bred to like that. But he's also just bred to be a good horse all around, and he's run like a good horse all 3 times. So I liked those 3 horses in this race, and I would probably just try and get through the race with those 3.
All right, let's get through the race and go to the Breeders' Cup Turf. It's race 10 on Saturday. Boy, you've got your shortest priced favorite of any of the Breeders' Cup races, at least on the morning line, in Golden Horn at 4 to 5, getting perhaps softer ground than they were hoping for when they sent him over, but coming off of an impressive win in the Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe. Mike, what's your take on Golden Horn as your legitimate favorite in the turf?
Yeah, but that's exactly what he is. He's a legitimate favorite. He's way the horse to beat in here. I doubt that I'll spend that much time trying to beat him in multi-race wagers. I think if he loses, he probably loses to the other European found, the 3-year-old filly, who's done some good things. I think her last couple of races in particular are better than they look. Her arc is actually a pretty good performance. She did not have an easy trip that day. I like the 2 Euros. I would be surprised if our American horses could beat both of them.
The Europeans have somewhat been complaining about the inside post, and they're complaining about the possible soft ground. The one thing they're not complaining about is the competition or lack thereof. I don't think they're losing sleep over Slumber or Cage Fighter or Ordak Dan or the Big Hoss. And if Golden Horn is what he's supposed to be, it doesn't matter if he's in post 1 or if he's starting from Louisville. He's supposed to win, and I agree with Mike. If it's not him, it's found.
All right, well, let's move on to the main event for Saturday. It's, of course, the BC Classic. Another short price favorite here. Do you see a short price double, the Golden Horn, American Pharoah, late, well, I guess it's not late double because there is one race after the Classic, but Turf to Classic double in this one. Dan, what's your take?
It's the most likely double, isn't it? Because in the case of Liam's Map and in the case of Songbird, here you have arguably the best horse with a strong pace advantage. He's way the horse to beat. You have to use him because, boy, if you're alive to a pick 5 or pick 6 and don't have American Pharoah, you probably can't ever come back to the racetrack. That being said, as with many of these favorites, while I am using him, I'm not singling him. I think Tonalist, if he shows up, can easily run with American Pharoah. Tonalist, as we know, is a 1.25 mile specialist. I don't believe this foolishness that he is just a Belmont horse for course. And with this inside post, perhaps it will motivate John Velasquez to motivate Tonalist going into the first turn so that he doesn't have to be 100 lengths out of it, because as we've seen, he doesn't have to be 100 lengths out of it to succeed. I'm using a lot of Tonalist. I'm using a lot of American Pharoah. I'm using a little bit of Smooth Roller, who was probably the sucker horse in the race based on that Beyer speed figure. And some might say it was a phony number in the Awesome again. But, boy, I don't want a horse like that with the best last Beyer in the race beating me at 20-1, and I get nothing. So that's the way I'm looking at it.
All right,
Dan,
Mike, what's your take?
Honor coach for you, Dan? I got to use honor code in this race.
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably very foolish to throw out honor code because his merits are obvious, and if you just watch his races, you know he has explosive talent.
Yeah.
I had a choice between Tonalist and honor code. You know me. I'm a fanboy.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to say you had a choice between honor code and Smooth Roller.
No, Smooth Roller is my C, you know, in the multiple.
I know what you're saying. I get you. I get the questions with honor code too, because a 1.25 miles could be pushing it, but I doubt it. I think he's going to be fine. And he's a relentless closer. Maybe the race doesn't set up great for him, but I'm using him. I'm using Tonalist. I think they both have a realistic chance to beat a horse like American Pharoah, who is going to be tough. I guess, you know, of all the big named horses in the race, the one who I would just be against and who maybe will beat me is Beholder. I know that she can win. She obviously, if she runs her Pacific Classic, she may in fact win this race, but I just want to see her do it. It doesn't sound like she shipped that great to this race. That bothers me. For a horse I feel like had to run her very best to beat a field like this, to go through that, what she's gone through the last couple of weeks. I don't love that, and I just wonder what kind of trip she can get. She's going to be closest to American Pharoah and have to race that horse. I'm just going to be against Beholder while hoping that she runs well.
It's logical. It makes a lot of sense. Actually, I'm thinking kind of along the same lines as you. I think the most likely scenario is maybe American Pharoah getting out to an early lead, maybe even easy early lead, and then improving his advantage late. But I can also see a world in which he's run down by Tonalist or even Honor Code, who is a fantastic horse and maybe even the best horse in the race, all things being considered. But my main concern with him is I just don't know if he's going to get the kind of pace he may need to run down these kinds of horses late.
Although at the end of the day, you know, that Shug's a wily old fox, and maybe one of the reasons he ran this horse a mile was to try to sharpen him up, so at least he could be a bit closer going 1.25 miles. I think he realizes that he has to be a little bit closer. You know, he's not obviously going to be sitting third, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's 20 out of it down the backstretch.
Right, yeah. If he runs the same race he ran in the Ali Sheba or even in the Whitney, I just don't see him being able to run down any of the ones on the front end late because he doesn't have a Liam's Map to set that kind of fast early pace.
Agreed.
All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen. We ran a little long. Thank you, everyone, for listening and staying with us the whole time. Of course, I will we'll end with showing the webinar schedule for the rest of the week. At 2 p.m. Eastern Time, we have Byron King, who, of course, covers Keeneland for his day job. So he'll bring some knowledge from the track and maybe even seeing some horses in the flesh working out this morning, give some fantastic insights there. And then we've got 2 more tomorrow with Brad Free and Marcus Hirsch. And of course, if anybody wants to see Mike and Dan, they can watch them on DRF Live starting on Friday and then continuing through Saturday. Gentlemen, thank you as always.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Everybody. Take care.